this video, we focus on 3 ways that you can structure activities that generate student interaction and discussion. These are really great activities for helping students overcome maths anxiety. Working with others helps them develop confidence and have some fun, and all of this can alleviate the fears they bring to adult numeracy classes. The activities encourage students talking and sharing. For me, the level of noise in a classroom is a measure of how well things are going. What we're going to do today is look at some things that I call models of activities or activity models, which are fairly simple structures that you can use and say, oh, I could use that structure and I could do this with it or that with it. Hopefully, by pointing them out as particular structures and showing you some examples, you can use them to create the things your students need themselves. I just want to talk a little bit now about why we want to do this discussion in maths classes. It is, after all, maths. There's 2 purposes for this. One's social. Now, you've certainly interacted. You've certainly broken the ice with each other and got on with the problem and climbed on the table and, you know, you've interacted with each other. You've had a social interaction. That's one of the benefits of doing these things. Different groups of people, and if I was doing this with my students, I'd be moving you around a little, especially at the beginning, because people tend to sit in the same place all the time, talk to the same people. If you've got people from different sorts of cultural backgrounds and things in your class, those barriers will stay unless you do something to move them around. So getting your students interacting really early on is a good idea. And one thing I did see when I was doing research into these sorts of activities was that one student in that class, or 2 students, used to come into the room. They'd sit by themselves, they'd never interacted with anybody unless forced to. After they'd done structured group work for a while, they actually started talking to each other. One was a very serious Muslim male, and the other one was a teenage boy that couldn't go to school anymore because he'd been not fitting in at all. And they started to actually interact with each other after they'd been doing structured group work for a while. So it's a matter of actually putting people into a situation where there's a reason to talk, and it does break down barriers. And once students have started to assist each other in these sorts of situations, the habit of helping each other continues. And I certainly observed that with the group that I was experimenting with. As far as participation goes, there's a lot of roles happen in working together. If you don't actually know how to solve the problem, you can still belong to the problem by taking on a social role of somebody comes in late, you tell them what you're doing. There's a lot of ways. You can ask questions of the other people. You can keep the group on track. Well, what are we saying? What are we doing here? What's going on? So as well as contributing knowledge of different kinds, either mathematical or real-world knowledge, and some of the things that we did in that problem involved reading the keys to the map, understanding what a map's telling you, using your prior knowledge. There's mathematical knowledge about direction and things like that. But there's also social knowledge about understanding about buses and pubs and things like that and what those problems are saying. So there's people bringing different kinds of knowledge together. So group work provides that opportunity for that sort of interaction between people. So everyone can contribute in some way or another, or at least they've got more chance, even if they don't know a lot of mathematics. The other thing that the literature has shown, and I have seen, and you probably know yourself, that you will attempt something more difficult if you're doing it with other people than if you were trying to do it by yourself. And because they're there and because you're all trying to do it, you will persevere on the task. So there's real cognitive benefits in getting people working together. Also, you're exploring ideas together and you're using maths-related language. You go into a foreign country, you can't speak the language, you are inarticulate, you are powerless. And for years we've been doing that to our students, not giving them any language so that they're always disempowered and they can never express themselves in mathematics. And one person that has written a lot about that is David Pym, an Englishman. And I thought this was just really lovely, this quote, and I'll let you read it for yourself actually. But I think the important thing is controlling images, controlling the mental world. How do you think about things if you can't name them? How do you think about things if you haven't got the words to describe them? And while I was doing that research in that classroom, I could just see that people had no language with which to describe what they were saying without extremely convoluted sentences, because they just didn't have the words that they needed. The matching models. These are the most simple model that we can use, because the answers are always there on the table and all you have to do is find them. And so I've got a lot of them because I found out that they were really successful, and I've made a lot of them, and we're going to have a look at them. Because the answers are all there, it's not nearly as anxiety-making as other sorts of problems, because you know, you can start with the most easy and you can work around it, and by some sort of process elimination you'll get to where you want to. So these are good icebreakers and things like that. What you do need to do with your students is encourage them to make sure that everybody knows. So if I come over here and say, how did you know this one? Not just the person that put it there knows, but all the other people in the group. It's been explained, how did you know?
Olympics in Cool, 50 metres. The width of an adult 10 centimetres. Volume of a kitchen.
Which ones did you find the easiest? Fingers?
No, the litre. The 1 litre is...
No, that's how much it's like.
A litre of milk. Was a litre of water? Yeah. You found the finger easy because
You got one.
you could look at it. Yeah. It's on hand. That's what he said. Sorry.
Because everything was so different, you had nothing we had to choose, oh, it must be outside of that or that.
Yeah.
Very different.
I always-
Yes.
Fairly clear.
I always have trouble with the babies not being in pounds but being in kilos.
Yeah, there are clues floating around in there, but only if you know a fair bit already. So we very quickly find out from listening to that what our students know. We're going to have a look at some of these in a different sense now. We're going to have a look at some graphs and the stories of graphs. So you've got 4 graphs and 4 statements, and you need to match the statements to the graph.
Crossing over, so maybe this one. Start, we could have had that there because the night was better at the end. Yeah. Attendance falls in winter. Winter then, isn't it? Yeah. June, July, August. Attendance is always high. There you go.
Did anyone work out what percentage okay meant?
Yeah, well, we were just guessing that there must be manufacturing something, and it's the number of whatever it is that.
Indeed, exactly what they can do. Successful product, fast quality control product, These are all based on what they do in the automotive industry.
Discussion of what's that.
Okay, now those were straight matching activities where everything was there and there was one for each. So it's match, 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 match. Yes, we're done. This one is a sorting activity, which I will get you to do. And this time There's not going to be an exact number, so you're not going to be able to say, yes, yes, that's done, that's done, that's done. I used to just do matching activities, match, 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 and it'd take quite a while to cut out. And you think, oh, that was over fairly quickly. And then I realised, yes, it was. And people didn't look that closely at the models. So now leaving the blanks mean they actually go back and they look at all the different models and they have to think more. So the first part's not threatening, and the next part, they've got models, but they have to think a bit. And so that's the idea of leaving this open and leaving some blanks. The particular activity that we are using here is called matching common fractions.
5 and 5.
It's 5 and 5, so there's
10 and 3 coloured in.
Now you've got a couple of lonely floaters there. I'd like you to make them not be so lonely and create some cards.
Okay, so you have to write on them or draw on them.
And decide together what you're going to put on those spare cards. I'd like you to
Spell it right. 3/8. You sure it's 8? So maybe just do a column of very nice. Liking your work so far?
The reason that the 5th is one of the chosen ones is it's not so easy, and therefore you have to think. And everybody in the group by then will be aware that all those 5ths need to be the same size of each other because there's a challenge. So it's not going to escape anybody's notice that that's what you're trying to do. These are a really good way of introducing a new topic. You've got adults that don't come like kids where you know who knows what, and they're there the first day and you want to know if they know anything. A matching and sorting activity is a really good way to observe that. They can help each other, so they're not going to feel too threatened. And you can use this to then go on and teach what you wanted to do, teach about fractions, or to find out that people didn't really know very much, so we can start with one of the simple ones and start from there talking about them. You can use them as revision. You're doing something else, but at the end of the session I wonder if they still know anything about fractions or about graphs or about anything, so they can be quick revision. Something like this, if the session's gone on a long time, they're getting a little bit ragged with what they're doing, or they've been working by themselves for too long, you can use one of these to change the energy, I think is how I think about it. And if they've all been doing individual work, it's a really good way to get people together for a little bit of interaction during that. And the informal assessment means you watching and making some notes about what you're observing, about the groups working together and what they know, as I just said. So this idea of building on students' existing knowledge, I think, is very important. So things like this are helping you look for what they can do. Say, oh look, you're really good at these fractions, these bits were a bit problematic, we can do a little bit of work on that. It is important to devise activities at the beginning with a class that allow you to find out what they know without putting them through the rigours of testing and things that are going to make them anxious. One of the important things is for you to be active in getting them to explain their thinking so that anybody would be able to answer questions like, why did you put this here? Or why do you think this is going? Could we put something else there? What else could go in that group? You're working out the encouraging questions as you go around, and if you can see that somebody's not really engaged with the rest of the group, you can put questions to them as well. So you have a role, an active role in them doing that group work. There are many of these matching and sorting activities available in the online resource Building Strength with Numeracy. These are really easy activities to create for yourself. We're going to do a back-to-back model. Carmel's going to read out her instruction, and Sarah's going to try and follow the instruction without seeing what Carmel is looking at.
So Sarah, draw a triangle and place a circle in the middle of it.
First off, you'll notice she's using words like circle and triangle. So we're going to try and use the mathematical words for shapes. What I'm going to get you to do is to start with the ones with the words on it, so you get to use a bit of language, and then get on to describing the pictures that you see in mathematical language and see what the other person comes up with. Everybody else now has to arrange themselves into pairs.
Okay, Shanna, draw a rectangle and use the top of it as the base for a triangle. Okay, so draw a rectangle and the top of it
Now this
is
gets a
the
bit
base
tricky here.
of a triangle.
Draw
Is that it? Yep, that's it. Like a house.
Okay. Do you like that? Oh, that's pretty good. Okay, are you ready?
Yeah. Draw a square and draw a line from the top right to the bottom left. Okay, I've got this picture. It looks like an ice cream cone. So what you have to do is draw a triangle with the pointy bit down, with a half circle on the top, like an ice cream, in an ice cream cone. Like, I think I've got it, like that. It's a triangle though, it's not really an ice cream cone shaped triangle, it's an equilateral triangle.
You can see how easy it is for people to resort to ordinary language to describe awkward shapes. This is, of course, because she wants her partner to succeed, as she did. The whole point of this exercise, though, is to get people to use the new, less familiar mathematical terms. In this case, a semicircle or half circle on top of an inverted or upside down triangle.
I think I've got it. Okay, let's have a look. Yeah, that's it. I did have a long cone. Yeah, I thought you would. After I said that, I thought, oh, she's probably done an ice cream cone shaped cone now. Yeah.
Your role as teacher is to circulate, listen, and gently steer them towards more mathematical terms. This is why I generally start with some written examples, because this gives learners practice in reading the terms I want them to use. For students, I'd use several of these, give them enough time to build up the language before starting their own descriptions.
Draw a horizontal line on your page, and halfway along your line, draw a line going from north to south. Oh, going. All right. So a west to east line, or a parallel horizontal line. And then in the middle of that horizontal line, start a second line that goes down almost the same length as that line. Oh, okay, so like a T.
Sometimes it's hard to find all of the mathematical language, like horizontal, vertical, or perpendicular. But by switching to directional language, eventually they got there. You've used a lot of language, you've compared them, and I think one of the nice things about this, no one's right and wrong, but here we've got two different pictures now, the one that was the model and the one that was drawn. How can we figure out what we might have said to get it more accurate? So it's partly working together and partly using it independently, the language, and we all know that words are quite difficult to describe these shapes, having tried it out. So what was some of the language that you were having to use? What sort of language? Perpendicular, that's a good one. Parallel, yes. Horizontal, vertical. 90 degrees, yep. Fractions of the juncture or intersection, yeah. So all of these language aspects are really important. So these are words that it's really good to teach your students, especially if they're going into technical areas. There are several other examples of back-to-back activities in building strength with numeracy. One set is reading aloud and writing large numbers, numbers in the thousands and millions. Another focuses on interpreting decimal numbers. Some other ideas are discussed in the following. Clock faces, people marking what they're seeing on the clock, somebody else putting it on the clock. Giving directions, which I've used with people. Using street directories, maps, GPSs, Google Maps, whatever is relevant to the people. And if you're trying to get someone to give directions over the phone, I started calling these on the phone activities when I was doing it with the soldiers from Timor that I was working with in Darwin, because we had maps of the Northern Territory and they were to pick some places and they were to give the instructions to go from one place to the other. But they also had to therefore look at the scale and say how far to drive and things like that. But they started getting into this acting it out language, sort of like, yes, sir, this is what you do. So I realised this on the phone, it's a really good contextual thing for why you would not be able to show the other person what you're looking at. I want you to work as a group, so I am not giving you one piece of paper each. You can have one at the end, but at the moment I'm giving you one per group. Therefore, you will have to not all do your own thing, but talk to each other. Okay, so one person, question by question, one person read it out, or you all look at it, depending on whether you can get close enough to look at it. Decide whether you think it will be true or false. I have found more information about chickens than you could possibly know there was to know doing this with groups of people. Everybody's got a chicken fact.
Dennis bought a 2 kilogram chicken to cook for dinner. How much do chickens normally weigh? 2 kilos. Yeah, big one. That could be true. Yes. So you think it's true? And you don't like chicken? Well, that's a big true.
A size 14 chicken, what does it mean? It means 1.4 kilograms. So has anyone seen a size 20 chicken? It doesn't matter if some of the questions are a bit ambiguous, that the answer is not quite cut and dried. This creates more discussion and opportunity for further inquiry. This one could motivate people to actually look at chicken sizes in the supermarket. Boiling point of water should be? 100 degrees Celsius, very important information. Water freezes at 0, yes it does, and what you want students to understand is that's the origin of the Celsius thermometer, freezing point, boiling point, and we call it centigrade because there's cent 100 degrees. That was divided up that way by scientists.
A household bucket holds about 2 litres of water. 2 litres is an ice cream tub, hey? Quarter of a kilo is a quarter. So a quarter of a kilo is 250 grams. So it's not the same.
400 grams of flour is the same as a quarter of a kilogram. Why would I put a silly question like that in? Because it's what we call a common mistake that students make about quarters and decimals and fours. So getting those common questions common errors into true and false questions is a good way to start talking about them before the mistakes are made. I really think with true and false you can mix up facts that you want them to know, things that might be things that you can have a good discussion about, and common misconceptions can go in there, giving you a chance to talk about them. Now, these are another way to introduce a new topic or to do some revision. Another different way at coming at material that you've been covering, and another way of changing energy and creating some interaction in a session where you didn't have much of that happening before. At the beginning of a class, you can just have a couple of easy statements at the beginning and one tricky one, which might take you into the topic that you wanted to start talking about. What we've done today is I've given you some things that I think you can use with your students, some things that have actually put you into a challenge position where you had to work and feel what it felt like to be challenged by a group problem. So I hope that we've had a good balance of those things. But you can see how it caused you to think more deeply once it was challenging, whereas some of the ones were quite easy, I think. Now, they are models. We've done a couple of examples, but you can generate infinite examples from those models. Some of these are what I call language using, where students have to understand the language, and others are language developing because they're having to use the language. And sometimes you have students put together in one class because of their language levels, but their numeracy levels are all over the place, so they need a fair bit of separate practice. Language-focused activities can be used for bringing them all together for at least some of the time in each session.